His body was trained at the gym. His mind was built somewhere else. The camera opens before dawn, in the blue-gray hour where the city still pretends it is innocent. Fluorescent lights flicker on inside a 24-hour gym wedged between a payday loan office and a closed-down diner. The place smells like disinfectant and old sweat, rubber mats and metal bars. Music thumps softly, not to inspire but to fill the silence. In the corner, a man moves with ritual precision. His name is Marcus Hale. He is 32 years old, 6 feet tall, carved from years of repetition. Veins stand like wires along his forearms as he grips the barbell. His breath is controlled, almost meditative. Lift. Pause. Lower. Again. Every movement is clean, disciplined, efficient. To anyone watching, Marcus looks like the kind of man who has figured life out, strong, focused, unbreakable. But the camera lingers on his face. There is no triumph there. No hunger for admiration. His eyes are distant, fixed on something far beyond the mirror in front of him. Each rep is not a display of power but an act of containment, as if the iron is holding something down inside him that refuses to stay buried. The gym clock reads 4:17 a.m. Marcus always comes at this hour. Not because he enjoys the quiet, but because the quiet reminds him of where he came from. Silence, to him, has always been louder than noise. Between sets, he sits on the bench, elbows on knees, sweat dripping onto the floor. His phone buzzes. A notification from a motivational page. Discipline beats motivation. He doesn't like it or share it. He doesn't need reminders. Discipline has never been his problem. The problem is memory. The camera cuts, not forward, but inward. Before the gym. Before the muscles. Before the calm breathing and deliberate control. Back to a smaller body, thinner arms, shoulders hunched not from exhaustion but from expectation. Back to a place where strength wasn't measured in pounds lifted, but in how much pain you could carry without breaking. Marcus grew up in a house where walls were thin and voices were not. A house that looked ordinary from the outside, peeling paint, overgrown grass, a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. Inside, time moved differently. Slowly. Carefully. Every sound meant something. As a boy, Marcus learned to listen before he learned to speak. He could tell who was walking down the hallway by the weight of their steps. He knew when the television volume meant distraction and when it meant cover. He understood that silence could be either safety or warning, and the difference mattered. His father was a man shaped by disappointment. Work that never paid enough. Dreams that shrank with every bill. A temper that arrived unannounced and left damage long after it was gone. His mother was quieter, not weak, but tired in a way sleep could never fix. She smiled often, too often, the way people do when they are trying to convince themselves. Marcus learned early that strength was not loud. It was not explosive. It was not even visible. Strength was staying calm when chaos wanted your attention. At school, teachers described him as well-behaved and mature for his age. They praised his focus, his restraint. They never asked why a child needed so much of either. He sat in class with his hands folded, eyes forward, absorbing everything, not because he loved learning, but because learning gave him control. Facts were predictable. Rules were fair. Books did not yell. When other kids played during recess, Marcus often stood alone near the fence, watching. Not out of loneliness, but vigilance. He scanned faces, movements, patterns. His mind was always working, building maps of how people behaved, when they lied, when they were afraid. Survival had taught him observation before confidence. At 13, he discovered weightlifting. The school gym was old and underfunded, the equipment mismatched and rusted. But when Marcus wrapped his hands around cold steel for the first time, something clicked. The weights were honest. They did not pretend. They did not change their rules depending on mood. If you lifted them correctly, they moved. If you didn't, they didn't. Simple. Fair. Earned. He began training obsessively. After school. Before school. Any time he could. His body responded quickly, as if it had been waiting for an outlet. Muscles formed. Shoulders widened. Teachers and classmates noticed the transformation and assumed it was confidence taking shape. They were wrong. The gym didn't build Marcus's confidence. It built his armor. Every pound added to the bar was another layer between him and the world. Every drop of sweat was a promise. No one would ever see him as powerless again. Strength became his language because words had failed him long ago. But while his body was growing louder, his mind was growing quieter. Inside, Marcus was sharpening something far more dangerous than muscle. He was learning restraint, emotional control, the ability to remain steady while everything around him shook. He learned how to smile while calculating, how to nod while remembering, how to endure. Years passed. High school ended. Home did not improve. The shouting never turned into conversations. The apologies never turned into change. One night, after a sound that should never come from behind a closed door, Marcus packed a bag and left. He was 18. No dramatic goodbye. No confrontation. Just a quiet exit before dawn, the same hour he would one day return to again and again. He slept on couches, worked whatever jobs would take him, trained wherever there was iron and space. People saw the muscles and assumed the story. They always assume the story. They think strength is built in public places. Gyms, fields, stages. They believe muscles tell the truth about a man. They don't see the private architecture, the long nights, the suppressed fear, the decisions made in silence that shape a person more deeply than any workout ever could. By his late 20s, Marcus was known as the calm one, the disciplined one, the man you wanted around when things went wrong. He rarely raised his voice, never lost control. He listened more than he spoke. People trusted him instinctively, without knowing why. What they didn't know was that Marcus wasn't calm because he was unafraid. He was calm because he had already survived worse. Back in the gym, the barbell hits the rack with a solid clang. Marcus wipes his face with a towel and looks at his reflection again. The man staring back is strong, composed, almost imposing. But behind his eyes lives a boy who learned too early that the world is not gentle, and a mind that learned, long before the body ever did, how to endure it. His body was trained at the gym. His mind was built somewhere else. And that place still follows him. The thing about leaving is that it never really means escape. Marcus learned that in the years after he walked out of that house with a single duffel bag and no destination. Freedom did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, a quiet room one night, a paycheck that cleared on time, a morning where no one raised their voice. Each fragment felt temporary, like borrowed air. He worked construction first. Long days, blistered hands, bodies measured by what they could lift and how long they could endure. The men around him talked loudly, laughed harder, and sized each other up with crude jokes and heavier loads. Marcus fit in without trying. He didn't brag. He didn't complain. He simply showed up early, worked until his muscles trembled, and left when the job was done. Supervisors noticed. "You don't say much," one of them said once, clapping him on the shoulder. "But you're solid. Reliable. Reliable." The word stuck. Marcus rented a small apartment on the edge of town. Bare walls. Mattress on the floor. A folding table that served as desk, kitchen counter, and dining room. At night, after 12-hour shifts, he trained in a local gym that stayed open late. He lifted until his body burned and his thoughts quieted. Sleep came easier when he was exhausted enough. But rest was never deep. Some nights, he woke to sounds that weren't there. A door slamming. A raised voice. His heart raced before his mind could catch up. He would sit on the edge of the mattress, breathing slowly, reminding himself where he was. Reminding himself that he was safe. The world saw a disciplined young man building a future. Marcus felt like a sentry still standing watch over a war that had already ended. He tried college next, night classes at a community school, criminal justice, psychology, anything that promised understanding. He wanted language for what he had lived through, frameworks that could explain why some people explode and others implode. He excelled academically, not because it came easily, but because he attacked it with the same methodical intensity he brought to training. Study. Repeat. Master. Professors praised his insight. Classmates gravitated toward him, sensing steadiness. A few friendships formed. A brief relationship followed, A woman named Elena, warm and expressive, who laughed easily and spoke openly about feelings. At first, she admired his calm. "You never lose your temper," she said once, half amazed. "Nothing rattles you." Marcus smiled, unsure how to explain that calm was not the absence of emotion, but the prison he kept it in. The cracks showed slowly. When Elena cried, Marcus froze. When she asked him to talk about his childhood, his answers were clean, factual, distant. No names. No scenes. No heat. She felt him listening without truly arriving. "You're here," she told him one night, touching his chest, "but you're also somewhere else." She wasn't wrong. Marcus didn't know how to let someone inside a structure built entirely for defense. Vulnerability felt like negligence. Trust felt like risk. When the relationship ended, it did so quietly, without blame. Elena left with sadness. Marcus stayed with relief, and an emptiness he couldn't lift away. He graduated. Took a job as a private security contractor. The role suited him: vigilance, responsibility, controlled authority. He protected buildings, events, people who paid for peace of mind. The uniform gave him legitimacy. The rules gave him boundaries. The danger, when it came, was clear and external. Unlike his past. One night, during a late shift at a corporate complex, an alarm triggered on the 3rd floor. Marcus responded automatically, heart rate steady, movements precise. He cleared hallways, checked corners, assessed threats that never materialized. When it was over, his supervisor praised his composure. "You didn't even flinch," he said. "Most guys panic." Marcus nodded, filing the comment away. He didn't flinch because panic was something he'd already mastered as a child. Fear was an old companion, not a surprise. As his career progressed, so did his reputation. Calm under pressure. Dependable. Unshakable. He was promoted, given more responsibility, trusted with situations others avoided. People confided in him without knowing why. Strangers felt safer when he stood nearby. Marcus became, in many ways, the man he had needed growing up. And yet, the injustice of his past never fully released its grip. He avoided going back to his old neighborhood. Avoided family gatherings. His mother called occasionally, her voice softer now, careful. She never spoke directly about the past. Neither did he. They danced around it, two people bonded by silence more than words. His father disappeared from his life entirely. No apology. No explanation. Just absence. Some nights, after particularly long shifts, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, lights off, city noise filtering through the window. He replayed moments he had never spoken aloud, decisions made too young, fears swallowed too quickly, anger buried so deep it felt geological. He wondered who he might have been if he hadn't needed to be strong so early. The gym remained his sanctuary. He trained not to impress, not to compete, but to maintain control. Regulars recognized him. Newcomers asked for advice. He gave it sparingly, emphasizing form, patience, respect for limits. "Strength isn't rushing," he told a younger man once. "It's knowing when to stop." The irony wasn't lost on him. Then came the incident. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that lulls you into complacency. Marcus was off duty, running errands, dressed casually. At a grocery store parking lot, voices rose near the entrance. A man shouting. A woman crying. A child frozen between them. Marcus noticed before anyone else did. He assessed distance. Tone. Body language. The man was agitated, pacing, fists clenching. The woman tried to calm him, her voice shaking. The child watched, wide-eyed, silent. Something old and sharp stirred in Marcus's chest. He didn't intervene immediately. He watched. Waited. Calculated. When the man grabbed the woman's arm, Marcus moved. Not with rage. With clarity. His voice was firm, controlled, cutting through the chaos. His presence redirected the man's attention. His stance communicated boundaries without escalation. The situation de-escalated quickly. The man backed off, muttering. Security arrived moments later. People thanked Marcus. Called him a hero. The woman hugged her child, trembling. Marcus stood there, heart pounding harder than it had during any workout, any shift, any drill. Because for the first time, the threat hadn't been abstract. It had been familiar. Too familiar. That night, he didn't go to the gym. He sat alone instead, hands shaking slightly, replaying the scene, not as it was, but as it overlapped with another time, another place. A child watching. A voice raised. An arm grabbed. Marcus realized something then, something uncomfortable and unavoidable. He hadn't just been protecting strangers. He had been standing up for a version of himself no one had ever defended. And once that door opened, it refused to close. The door didn't slam open. It creaked. That was what unsettled Marcus the most in the days after the parking lot incident. Not the memory of confrontation, but the slow, persistent way it echoed through him. Once the mind acknowledges something it has avoided for decades, silence stops being protective. It becomes accusatory. Marcus tried to return to routine. Early mornings. Work. The gym. Controlled breathing. Familiar weight. But something had shifted. The iron no longer quieted his thoughts the way it used to. Between reps, images intruded uninvited. A child's frozen stare. A woman's trembling voice. The echo of his own calm command, steady, authoritative, the voice he wished someone had used once. Sleep grew restless. Dreams sharpened. Scenes he had filed away as distance suddenly arrived with color, sound, temperature. He woke before dawn more often than not, heart racing, jaw clenched, hands curled into fists that had nowhere to strike. For the first time in years, Marcus considered that his discipline might not be healing him. It might be hiding him. The realization didn't come all at once. It came through irritation, snapping at a coworker over a minor oversight. Through fatigue, the kind rest doesn't fix. Through an unfamiliar heaviness during conversations, like he was carrying something unsaid that grew heavier the longer it remained unspoken. One afternoon, his supervisor called him into the office. No reprimand. No complaint. Just concern. "You've been solid as always," the man said carefully. "But you seem stretched. You want some time off." Marcus almost said no. Habit pulled him toward denial. But something else, quieter, braver, intervened. "Maybe," he said. The word felt strange in his mouth. "Yeah. Maybe that would help." Time off didn't bring relief. Without structure, the walls crept closer. Marcus found himself avoiding noise, crowds, even the gym. He walked instead long, aimless routes through the city, letting his body move while his mind wandered places he had never allowed it to go. On one of those walks, he passed a community center he didn't recognize. A simple sign out front listed programs: youth tutoring, domestic violence support, counseling services. He stopped without meaning to. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies. A woman at the desk looked up and smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that assumed safety. "How can I help you?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. The pause stretched. His chest tightened. Words lined up behind his teeth, unfamiliar and untrained. "I'm not sure," he said finally. "I just needed to come in." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Gave him a clipboard. Pointed him toward a chair. That was how it began, not with confession, but with permission. The counselor he was assigned to was older, soft-spoken, direct without being forceful. She didn't rush him. Didn't pry. She asked simple questions and waited longer than was comfortable for answers. Marcus gave facts at first. Dates. Moves. Jobs. Achievements. He spoke like a report, not a story. "And growing up," she asked gently, "what was that like for you?" The room felt smaller. Marcus stared at the floor, jaw tight. His instinct was to minimize, to rationalize, to say it wasn't that bad. That others had it worse. That he survived. But survival, he was beginning to learn, was not the same as resolution. "It was loud," he said slowly. "Unpredictable." She waited. "I learned early how to stay out of the way," he continued. "How to read a room. How to be invisible when I needed to be." "And how did that affect you?" she asked. The question landed harder than he expected. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. Even now. The sessions were exhausting. Marcus left them drained in a way no physical training had ever produced. Each memory revisited felt like lifting a weight without handles, awkward, unstable, threatening to slip. But something else happened too. Relief. For the first time, he was naming experiences that had lived in him unnamed. He spoke about fear without immediately neutralizing it. About anger without apologizing for its existence. About sadness without converting it into discipline. He learned language for patterns he had mistaken for personality. Hypervigilance. Emotional suppression. Control as coping. Strength as camouflage. The counselor never framed him as broken. She framed him as adapted. That version of you did what it needed to do, she told him once. But you don't live there anymore. The words stayed with him. Marcus began volunteering at the same community center, almost by accident. He helped with security at events, then with mentoring programs. He gravitated toward the kids who stood apart from the noise, who watched more than they spoke. He recognized the posture, the eyes. He didn't ask them to open up. He didn't force conversation. He simply showed up, consistently, calmly. Modeled steadiness without pressure. One afternoon, a boy named Isaiah asked him, "How come you're not scared of anything?" Marcus paused. "I am," he said honestly. "I just learned what to do with it." The boy nodded, absorbing that in silence. Through these interactions, Marcus felt something unfamiliar growing, not the sharp edge of vigilance, but a quieter sense of purpose. His past, once a weight he carried alone, was becoming a bridge. Not something to hide, but something that allowed him to see others more clearly. Still, the hardest step remained. His mother. He hadn't spoken to her in months. Not out of anger, but avoidance. The unspoken agreement between them had always been survival through silence. Breaking it felt like betrayal. But growth, he was learning, demanded honesty. He visited her one evening, heart pounding harder than any confrontation he'd ever faced. She looked older. Smaller. The house was quieter now. They sat at the kitchen table. Tea between them. The clock ticking. "I've been going to counseling," Marcus said. She stiffened slightly. "I'm trying to understand some things," he continued. "About growing up. About what we didn't talk about." Tears filled her eyes before he finished. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have protected you better." The words shattered something in him. Not with violence, but release. "I know you did what you could," he said. And for the first time, he meant it without qualification. "But we don't have to pretend anymore." They talked for hours. Not fixing the past. Not rewriting it. Simply acknowledging it existed. When Marcus left that night, the city felt different. Lighter. Not safer, just more honest. Back at the gym days later, Marcus lifted again. Same movements. Same discipline. But something fundamental had changed. He wasn't training to outrun his past anymore. He was training to stand with it. His body was still forged in iron and repetition. But his mind, the part that mattered most, was finally learning that strength could also mean truth. The moment didn't announce itself as a climax. There was no music swelling, no sudden realization framed like a revelation. It arrived quietly, disguised as responsibility, the way the most consequential moments in Marcus's life always had. It came in the form of a phone call. The community center director spoke calmly, but urgency threaded her words. A teenage boy named Isaiah, the quiet one who lingered at the edges, who watched before he spoke, had been involved in an incident at school. A fight. Security had intervened before it escalated, but the aftermath was heavy. Isaiah was withdrawn, unresponsive, and on the brink of suspension. "He asked for you," she said. "Specifically." Marcus sat still after the call ended, phone resting in his palm. His first instinct was caution. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't a therapist. He had spent his life containing chaos, not confronting it head-on. But another truth pressed forward. Neither had anyone been trained when he needed them most. He arrived at the center late afternoon. The building hummed with muted activity, distant voices, doors closing, chairs scraping across floors. Isaiah sat alone in a small room, elbows on knees, gaze fixed on the floor. The posture was unmistakable. Marcus didn't sit across from him. He sat beside him. They stayed silent for a long moment. No questions. No instructions. Just presence. Finally, Isaiah spoke. "I didn't mean to hit him that hard." Marcus nodded. "I believe you." That was all it took. The words poured out in fragments. Teasing that had gone on for months. A shove that crossed a line. A flash of heat. The sickening moment after, when control vanished and consequences arrived. "I don't know what happened," Isaiah said, voice cracking. "I just snapped." Marcus recognized the fear beneath the shame, the terror of discovering a force inside yourself you don't yet understand. "I do," Marcus said quietly. "And it doesn't mean you're bad." Isaiah looked up, searching his face for deception. Marcus continued. "It means you've been carrying something too heavy for too long. And it came out sideways." They talked until the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the room. Marcus didn't excuse the behavior. He didn't minimize the harm. But he reframed the moment, not as a verdict, but as information. "This is the moment," Marcus told him, "where you decide what kind of strength you want." That night, Marcus drove home with his chest tight and his thoughts louder than usual. The conversation had stirred something raw. He hadn't just been advising Isaiah. He had been speaking to himself. For years, Marcus had believed strength was control. Absolute, unyielding, solitary. But watching Isaiah sit in the wreckage of a moment he didn't understand, Marcus saw the cost of that belief laid bare. Control without understanding wasn't strength. It was delay. The next weeks tested him. At work, an incident escalated faster than protocol predicted. A man refused to comply, shouting, aggressive, unpredictable. Marcus stepped in automatically, posture firm, voice calm. But something inside him shifted. Instead of shutting emotion down, he acknowledged it, the surge of adrenaline, the echo of old fear, and guided it rather than suppressing it. The situation resolved without force. Later, alone, Marcus noticed his hands weren't shaking. At the gym, he altered his training. Fewer max lifts. More mobility. More balance. He focused on breath, on alignment, on listening to what his body needed instead of commanding it. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was intentional. For the first time, his discipline felt cooperative instead of punitive. The real confrontation came weeks later, unexpectedly. His father's name appeared on his phone. Marcus stared at it, pulse thudding in his ears. He hadn't seen that name in years. Hadn't prepared for this moment because preparation would have meant hope, and hope had once been dangerous. He answered. The voice on the other end was older, weaker, stripped of authority by time and consequence. There was an illness, regret, a request to meet. Marcus listened without interruption. When the call ended, he sat in silence for a long time. Meeting his father wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about reconciliation or closure wrapped in neat language. It was about facing the last shadow he'd been training around his entire life. They met in a small cafe. Neutral ground. Public. Safe. His father looked smaller than memory. Fragile. Human in a way Marcus had never allowed himself to see before. "I wasn't a good man," his father said, staring into his coffee. "I know that now." Marcus felt anger rise, hot, familiar, justified. But alongside it came something else. Clarity. "You were responsible," Marcus said evenly. "For what happened. For what didn't." His father nodded, tears slipping free. "I'm not here to fix you," Marcus continued. "And I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I don't want to carry this anymore." The words landed like a release valve opening. He didn't absolve. He didn't excuse. He told the truth, about fear, about silence, about growing up too fast. He spoke without raising his voice, without attacking, without shrinking. When they parted, nothing was resolved. But something was reclaimed. Marcus walked out lighter, not because the past had changed, but because it no longer dictated the present. At the community center, Isaiah returned slowly, quieter but steadier. They worked together on breathing techniques, physical training, emotional literacy disguised as discipline. Isaiah learned that strength could be practiced, not just endured. Watching the boy grow, Marcus understood the final truth he'd been circling for years. His body had been trained to protect him. But his mind, shaped by adversity, silence, and survival, had been waiting for permission to transform. And now, standing at the intersection of who he was and who he could be, Marcus realized something profound. The strongest moment of his life wasn't when he lifted the heaviest weight. It was when he chose not to carry what no longer belonged to him. And that choice changed everything. Years later, people would still assume they understood Marcus Hale by looking at him. They would notice the posture first, upright, grounded, unhurried. They would clock the calm in his movements, the economy of motion that suggested discipline refined over time. In gyms, new faces still mistook him for someone chasing size, dominance, spectacle. In rooms filled with tension, strangers still relaxed when he arrived, as if his presence quietly promised order. What they couldn't see was that Marcus no longer lived behind his strength. He lived inside it. Morning light filtered through the windows of the community center as Marcus unlocked the doors. The building was older now, scuffed floors and chipped paint telling the story of years of use, but it felt alive in a way pristine spaces never did. Voices would arrive soon. Laughter. Arguments. Growth. Isaiah was already there, stretching in the corner, taller now, broader, less folded in on himself. 17. Strong, but not just in the visible ways. "You're early," Marcus said. Isaiah shrugged. "Didn't want to miss the warm-up." Marcus smiled. Not because of the words, but because of what they meant. Choice. Intention. Ownership. They trained together, not heavy lifting, not punishment disguised as effort. Controlled movements. Breath work. Balance drills that demanded focus more than force. Marcus corrected posture gently, explained the why behind the work. The lesson was never about the exercise alone. "Your body listens," he reminded Isaiah. "But only if you're listening first." After training, they sat on the steps outside, watching the city wake up. Traffic hummed. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a siren wailed and faded. "Do you ever still get angry?" Isaiah asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said. "But it doesn't scare me anymore." That answer would have been impossible once. Anger had once felt like a threat, something that, if acknowledged, might explode. Now it was information. A signal. Something to understand rather than suppress. Isaiah nodded, absorbing that quietly. Later that afternoon, Marcus headed to the gym, not the 24-hour place wedged between failing storefronts, but a smaller, brighter space he co-owned with two partners. No mirrors along every wall. No blaring music. The focus here was longevity, not ego. Clients ranged from former athletes to office workers, trauma survivors to teenagers still learning what their bodies could do. Marcus didn't advertise himself as a transformation expert. He taught fundamentals. Respect. Awareness. When a new client asked how he'd built his physique, Marcus didn't mention programs or numbers. Consistency, he said. And learning when to rest. The gym was no longer a hiding place. It was a tool. That evening, Marcus visited his mother. They cooked together now, awkward at first, then easier. Conversations still avoided some edges, but not out of fear. Out of mutual agreement that healing didn't require reopening every scar. She watched him move through the kitchen, sure-handed, calm. "You seem lighter," she said quietly. "I am," Marcus replied. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. On the drive home, he passed the old neighborhood without the familiar tightening in his chest. The house was still there, but it no longer felt like an anchor. Just a place that had shaped him, not defined him. That night, Marcus returned to the gym where it all began. Not to train. Just to stand. The fluorescent lights still flickered. The air still smelled like iron and disinfectant. The same kind of men moved weight in silence or self-display. Marcus leaned against a pillar, watching, remembering. He remembered the boy who had come here seeking armor. He remembered the man who had believed survival was the same as living. And he honored them both, without letting them rule him. He stepped onto the floor, wrapped his hands around a familiar bar, and lifted, not chasing numbers, not proving anything. Just moving with awareness. Breath steady. Mind present. In the mirror, he saw a strong man. But he also saw something else. Peace. Later, walking out into the cool night air, Marcus understood the full shape of his journey, not as a victory over the past, but as a relationship with it. The mind that had once been built in fear had been rebuilt in truth. The discipline that had once been rigid had softened into wisdom. He had learned that strength could be loud or quiet, visible or invisible, but the truest kind always made room for others. His body had been trained at the gym, but his mind had been forged in places no one applauded, in silence, in restraint, in moments of choice no one witnessed. And now, standing fully in himself, Marcus carried neither the weight of the past nor the illusion of invincibility. Only the grounded certainty that real strength is not about how much you can hold. It's about knowing what to finally let go.